Hello and welcome back to the PKD Dietitian podcast. I want to start today by asking you a question. What do you get when you take a scientist who researches PKD and then you add in discoveries related to PKD growth pathways, and then finally you add in the realization that these pathways depend on nutrients? I'll tell you what you get. You get a medical food. More specifically, KetoCitra, the first and only medical food for polycystic kidney disease. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Thomas Weimbs, and we're going to dive into all of this for you. Thomas is a professor at UC Santa Barbara, where he is also the director of the Weimbs Lab, which focuses solely on studying PKD, which Dr. Weimbs has been researching for over 20 years. His research primarily focuses on the pathways of PKD with an emphasis on developing new therapies. In 2020, Dr. Weimbs founded the company Santa Barbara Nutrients, the goal being to help bring these new therapies based on his groundbreaking research to the PKD community, all while being grounded in advocacy and seeking positive impact. Join us as we dive into what a medical food is, how KetoCitra, Santa Barbara Nutrients' first product, was formulated specifically for PKD, and our discussion on opportunities to impact the progression of PKD. Welcome, Dr. Weimbs. I am so excited to have you joining me today on the PKD Dietitian podcast. So let's jump right in. And for listeners who are not familiar with you and your background, perhaps we can start a little bit at the beginning. So you've been researching PKD for a long time. What path led you to PKD?
Hi, Diana. Good to be here. Thanks for having me. Yes. So how did I get onto the PKD train? It happened way back then, over 20 years ago, when I started as a brand new assistant professor. At the time, actually, it's a Cleveland clinic, in Cleveland, Ohio. As an assistant professor, you have to decide what you actually want to do, with your lab. And, you hire people to work for you, students, researchers, and so on. Got to work on some problem that seems important. I was planning to work on something totally different, something that I had done during my postdoctoral research and at University of California in San Francisco. But then I was approached by a couple or by a family in Cleveland. They had very close ties to the Cleveland Clinic, and they had PKD in the family. They had, some wealth in the family. They had been supporters of the Cleveland Clinic, and they really wanted to support PKD research, but nobody was doing it at the time. So my chairman at the time told them, hey, here's, this new assistant professor that works with kidney cells. And we had a meeting, and we figured out, they were very interested in us doing work on PKD. I was looking for something worthwhile to do, so to speak. And so we decided we would do it. And they decided they would fund the research. So I was able to hire a postdoctoral researcher in my lab. And we started to read the literature to figure out what was known, what was unknown. Of course, 20 plus years ago, most things were unknown. And we figured out where we thought we could contribute something to the knowledge, and started some plans, some experiments, and they actually worked out pretty well. We got some really interesting data early on, published a couple of really good papers, and that kind of started the entry into the PKD research field. And then my first big NIH grants, for example, were all on the PKD research part of the lab. And I had a much tougher time getting the other work funded that I was initially thinking of doing. So it kind of turns the whole lab into a PKD research lab that way.
Wow. It sounds like PKD kind of fell into your lap and found you. I think one thing that's really important is that what I'm also hearing is that people within the PKD community were the advocates for getting you involved and paying for your research. And I really do believe that that shifts so much within PKD research. So, well, we are really lucky to have you 20 plus years later. I'm glad that path and the funding put you on that path. So you have the Weimbs Lab and you ended up landing with your home base in Santa Barbara, California. In that huge span of time that you've solely been researching PKD, what do you feel is the most impactful discovery or revelation that your lab and your work has made?
Yeah, so we actually started out making sort of like an initial splash, 20 something years ago, maybe. My first paper already made an impact because we stumbled on this so-called mTOR pathway. It doesn't really matter what it is, but there was already a drug available called rapamycin, that was approved for something different. So this then actually led to a very quick translation into clinical trials. So there were big clinical trials that started in Europe, one in Germany, one in Switzerland. I helped get the one in Germany a little bit off the ground and persuade the company behind the drug to actually put money into it. So that was sort of unusual that, very quickly an academic paper could actually lead to clinical trials, but it did. Unfortunately, the clinical trials didn't come out great. The results were that essentially, yes, you can use this drug, but you can never use high enough doses to actually have an impact there, have some efficacy. And you essentially end up with only side effects, especially in a chronic disease like polycystic kidney disease, where you have to treat patients for years and decades. It's just not oftentimes possible to treat somebody for really long times with drugs that have all kinds of side effects, and then you end up making people sicker than they were to begin with, or than they would be without the pharmacological intervention. So this became a bit of a dead end road, practically speaking. And then, many years later, I think maybe the most impactful discovery was, all these pathways that we discovered that are actually, or that we worked on, that can be influenced by dietary and lifestyle interventions, which is something that's relatively new. The last few years, I think we published those papers in 2019. And it's been going strong ever since. And I'm very excited about that because you can potentially get around not even having to use any drugs, any pharmacological interventions, and you can instead, attack the problem with diet and lifestyle, which makes it, of course, also much more accessible to the entire world out there, third world countries, anyone, you name it. That I think is a game changer. Of course, it has disadvantages. If you don't have a big pharma company behind you, then who's going to pay the bills to actually do all the research? That's always the drawback if it's a non-pharmacological approach. Yeah.
It's crazy how that sounds a little bit backwards, but now you're speaking my language, the food and the diet and lifestyle language. And it sounds like that science is not your only superpower. It sounds like you're pretty good at fundraising and getting grants and funding. So that, I think, probably absolutely helps when you come up against big pharma not really funding the research. You brought us from 20 years ago up until about 2018 when you had these discoveries and publications about the pathways, PKD, that are nutrient dependent and do rely on nutrition. From there, what did you discover we could do with diet, or an opportunity that we could do with diet to kind of cut off those pathways that drive cyst growth? Just the overview.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So we basically figured out two different pathways, or two different mechanisms, if you will, that make PKD worse. And it's all based on animal studies. Of course, that's where you start. And these two different mechanisms have to do, one of them with the cellular metabolism, and where we, actually many other labs had already kind of found lots and lots of data suggesting that cyst cells in PKD are dependent on glucose. This process called glycolysis, that takes the glucose and turns it into energy. So these cells are kind of stuck using glucose, and that's normally not a problem for these cells because we Americans, let's say this on a standard American diet, have plenty of glucose floating around our blood. So we essentially feeding these cysts, their preferred food, and we keep them happy, which is, actually not in the interest of someone with PKD, right? So you don't really want to feed your cysts and make them grow faster and larger.
No, you definitely do not.
Right, exactly. But the way around it, as we found, is you can essentially switch the whole body metabolism into ketosis. And I know you know all about it. But of course, ketosis is just the opposite of using carbohydrates. And you can actually limit your carbohydrate intake. If you limit carbohydrates, then the body starts burning fat instead. And then that means you can essentially starve those cysts, keep them unhappy, and prevent them from growing ever faster. So that's the one mechanism that has to do with ketosis. And the other mechanism that we found that makes PKD worse are these microcrystals. And it has to do with the function of the kidney, where the kidney has to excrete all these waste products out of the body, with the urine. Some of the waste products just happen to be very insoluble. So they tend to precipitate, they form these microcrystals, sometimes while they're going through the kidney. And these microcrystals, they're very, very sharp little, structures that can really damage the kidney. The kidney doesn't want microcrystals, and eventually these microcrystals, they can aggregate and they can grow and form kidney stones. So you don't want kidney stones either. And what we found is that these microcrystals can really make the disease worse. There's lots of clinical associations as well. So people with PKD tend to have frequent kidney stones, and those people with PKD that have frequent kidney stones, they also have worse progression of their PKD. So it kind of all fits together. So what we found is that you really want to antagonize the microcrystals, just make sure they don't form or as little as possible. These microcrystals you can actually really antagonize with diet and lifestyle changes. So once you know what the problem is, you can actually try to do something about it.
Very interesting. What we have is the two pathways kind of broken down here. We've got the pathway that the actual cyst cells like to get their energy from. That's what you're talking about with the glucose, which is blood sugar, and cutting that off, either reducing it or dramatically reducing it with a ketogenic diet so that we're not feeding cyst cells, because I know I've said this before, they tend to be sugar addicts. And blood sugar, blood glucose, that's what it is. And then the other pathway is reducing the stressors that essentially piss cysts off, those microcrystals, and then making it so that, really added bonus, reduce risk for kidney stones, and just all associated with much better outcomes and slower progression. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What we found is in the lab, ketosis is highly beneficial in PKD, and that, avoiding these crystals is highly beneficial. So we thought, all right, what if you just combine both, right? So you have keto and you have the antagonism of those crystals, which I think makes sense, because why would you only want to address one problem and not both at the same time? I think that might be the key to squeezing out the most bang for the buck, if you will, to just go after both mechanisms at the same time.
Both at the same time. You've got all this amazing research and you've got all of this information. So walk me through a little bit. What made you say, hey, I'm going to take all this information and create a nonprofit company in order to share this with the PKD community? Walk me through that process, because you've taken all of this information about what we know about PKD and the pathways and combined that into a nutritional food for PKD.
Good question. Just one, for the record. So The company we founded is actually not non-profit. It's still a for-profit, but we incorporated it as what's called a benefit corporation. What a benefit corporation is it's still a for-profit. The company can then make decisions, business decisions, not only based on maximizing shareholder value, which a regular company, that's the only thing they can use to guide their company decisions. Benefit corporation, they can also take other considerations into account, such as, sustainability, the environment, any benefit to in this case, to the customer, the patients, benefit to employees, and so on. So we're not quite as, in the corporate trenches as, almost all the other companies out there. Why do we even think of starting a company at all? And, of course, my day job is as a professor at the State University, University of California, Santa Barbara. So you wouldn't really necessarily think that would be something I would do or would even think of because I have a job. I don't need a second job. But the problem is sometimes, especially in this case, all the kind of approaches we came up with that we think would benefit people with polycystic kidney disease, they're not really approaches that would be pursued by pharmaceutical companies because there's very little money to be made. You can't really, if you tell someone go on a ketogenic diet, that's it. You cannot really sell a ketogenic diet, or if you tell people do some fasting, nobody earns any money from that. But we did figure out that we can mimic some of the effects of a ketogenic diet by supplementing with this main ketone, beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB, which is usually made by the liver during ketosis. So to my surprise, in the lab, we found, if we just give this ketone to rats with PKD, it actually mimics the beneficial effects of fasting and starving and being on a ketogenic diet. But how do you make this available?
Just to step in there.
Yes.
Ketogenic diets are not starving. I just want to clarify that for the listeners out there. Two different things, guys. And Thomas, what is the name of this company? And I stand corrected. I've met so many lovely people that work for your company and within your company. And so they're just doing so much good work and advocacy that in my brain is a bigger thing than a company. So what is the name of your company?
Yeah, it's the company name is Santa Barbara Nutrients. We just call it SBN for short, Santa Barbara Nutrients. It really came about by a whole bunch of folks coming together. Actually, all of them either kidney researchers or kidney patients, actually PKD patients, just decided we either do this or nobody will ever do this. It would be impossible to get a pharmaceutical company to develop a inexpensive product like the one we ended up developing, because they would never be able to get their money back if they develop this as an FDA approved drug. For your listeners, the average cost, I believe, to bring a new drug to market in the US is $1.5 billion, a billion with a B. So something else had to happen, we essentially, a whole bunch of amazing people came together, most of them with polycystic kidney disease, that all had sort of industry experience, and they're all experts in something. We have a fantastic patent lawyer, for example, on the team. We could never afford anyone like that with that kind of experience, unless it's a founder of a company. Founded this company, and we came up with the idea to essentially combine two inexpensive ingredients to attack these two different pathways I was talking about, ketosis and those crystals. All the ingredients you needed for that are already available as supplements, but we were able to combine them and actually figure out that you get a synergistic effect. If you actually really go after both pathways at the same time, you get kind of more benefit than, just like adding one compared to an additive effect. It also allowed us to lower the dose of these compounds, and we came up with a really good formulation there. Because these ingredients are all food ingredients, you're able to put this together not as a drug, but as a food. It's called a medical food. That's a certain FDA category. And the Food and Drug Administration in the US, the name already says it, food and drugs. They regulate foods, they regulate drugs. They also regulate supplements. One particular category is called medical foods. They are essentially foods, but they're used for medical purpose. And that's what we put together. And that's this product, KetoCitra, a medical food. It's not a drug, so it's not prescription, and it does not treat or cure a disease or prevent a disease. That would be a drug, claim, so to speak. So we can't say that KetoCitra cures anything, which of course it doesn't really. It's a genetic disease. Even if you improve the kidney phenotype, or let's say, or the kidney problems, the person still has polycystic kidney disease. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned something I'd like to talk a little bit more about, and that is specifically KetoCitra. It's essentially your research applied to a nutritional food. You told us a little bit about what medical food is and how it serves a certain purpose. Tell me a little bit more about why KetoCitra is considered and was approved to be a medical food. I think that's really interesting, that difference between a supplement you can order on Amazon and a medical food that has science-backed purpose. Tell me a little bit more about what it means to be a medical food.
Yeah, good question. And in fact, most people don't really know what this, and neither did I. When we started all this, there was a lot of learning in there, learning experience. There's different categories of products, and they all have different, purposes, if you will. So obviously, regular foods are for regular eating, a banana, bread, and so on, right? So you don't need FDA approval to bake a bread and sell it. So those are regular foods. Everybody, I think, knows what drugs are. Typically drugs are chemical compounds, that are new to the world, new to nature. They had never been out there before. They're designed somewhere in a lab. Sometimes they can be nature derived and often kind of derivatized. But drugs are always, by default, considered to be unsafe, right? Unless you prove that they are safe. So that's why important part of a drug approval is the safety, because, you have this random chemical compound that nobody's ever put into a human, let's say. Drug company first has to prove it's safe. It doesn't kill everyone. It doesn't have, horrendous side effects. And then they have to prove that it's effective, can get it approved as a drug.
It all goes back to the do no harm.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And that's why, and that makes a lot of sense, right? So drugs really should be going through this rigorous process. But of course, a food is already safe, right? So, a food is food. So you don't actually have to establish the safety anymore, because foods are, you don't have to prove to anyone that bread is safe or banana is safe. So this category medical foods comes in. So all the ingredients, they have to be what's called GRAS, generally recognized as safe, intended then for the dietary management of a person with a certain disease. And, you have to be scientific reasons why, put these foods together for a certain disease. And there are many, many examples of medical foods, for all kinds of different, typically genetic disease, to make sort of a case for all the research behind it and the science behind it. But important to remember is that it's still a food. It's regulated as a food, so you don't have to go for the same clinical trials that are typically a drug trial. But medical foods are also a little different from supplements, dietary supplements, and the distinction there is supplements actually don't have to be safe. Strangely enough, so supplements can contain ingredients that are not GRAS. They're not generally recognized as safe. So, if you will, a supplement could potentially be somewhat unsafe, and that's often sometimes the case, especially like herbal extracts where you don't really know what's in it. So oftentimes, there are supplements out there that have never been shown to be safe. So there's a bit of a caution there with supplements. And that's why I think a lot of doctors are worried about supplements, because they don't have to be proven to be safe and they're not foods.
They're definitely not regulated whatsoever. We've got the supplement and we've got a medical food. And from what I'm hearing, in order to be qualified as a medical food, there has to be science-backed research. There also has to be a potential benefit for a specific disease state. There also is a regulation of what goes into it, and it's all generally recognized as safe. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, that's roughly right. The manufacturing, for example, has to adhere to a GMP, general manufacturing protocols. So they're in a very strict procedure. So the manufacturer gets audited and accredited, if you will. The FDA, for example, can go ahead and audit a manufacturer and say, hey, you guys are making GMP medical foods, show us what you got. And, let's see, let's inspect your facility. So have to be always, up to date and tip top. And they're actually voluntarily certified. There are organizations like the NSF that does these certifications. So they're inspectors really regularly. So there's pretty high standards involved. And, even the warehousing and shipping has to be under food regulations. But things have to be climate controlled and so on. You couldn't just have a rat infested warehouse, for example. So it's
that's a terrible image. Yes. I like this oversight. I wish it was more widespread with supplements, but we're not talking about a supplement here. And I think that's a really important distinction, that KetoCitra is a medical food and it is designed specifically for unique needs of PKD. And I think a lot of people, just in listening to you now, I really hope understand how much work went into this, creating KetoCitra and the science behind it and all the regulation. And I thank you for that. I know it was an uphill battle, and being the only medical food that is available for PKD. Now, I would love to dive in with you a little bit more about what's in KetoCitra and why. Because there's all these things within KetoCitra that are so PKD specific and beneficial. And so I would love to just give an overview about what's in KetoCitra and what the benefit or the purpose is for specifically PKD. How does that sound?
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. All right.
At the top, you mentioned the two big things, that you have this ketone, you called it beta hydroxybutyrate, BHB, and then you also have a component that helps with the crystals. Those sound like the two big pieces or parts of KetoCitra. What are they?
Exactly. So, and it was the name of the product. It came in handy, keto for the ketone and citra for citrate, actually. So the ketone, beta hydroxybutyrate, a long word, hard to pronounce, or just BHB for short. It's one of the main ingredients there. And, as you well know, when we're in nutritional ketosis, when we're either fasting or we're on a ketogenic diet, our liver makes BHB, right? So that's how our normal body makes it. And the liver actually makes it in huge amounts, huge quantities. And the liver gets the substrate for making BHB from the fat, the fat cells, our fat tissue. So when we're in ketosis, our fat tissue can actually finally let go of all the fat and sends these fatty acids to the liver. The liver turns it into BHB, sends it back into the bloodstream, and all the cells in the body can consume it and then use it for energy. That's exactly that molecule, BHB. You can just take BHB exogenously. That's the term. So you just drink it, essentially. It gets into your bloodstream just as well as if your liver would make it. BHB has been out as supplements, for many, many years. Lots of people have been taking it for energy and for sports nutrition kind of purposes, also as weight loss, for weight loss and so on. So there's a lot of experience with BHB as a supplement already out there. As I said, we found in our research that the exogenous BHB can really mimic a lot of the effects of dietary ketosis. The idea is that we're essentially helping along the dietary ketosis, or even for people that are not in ketosis, still have them be able to get a benefit from just supplementing with exogenous BHB.
So you've got BHB in there, which is the ketone, which if someone's following a ketogenic diet, that's what they're making for energy sources.
Of course, the problem with a ketogenic diet is I think they work really well, except it's really hard to do for most people. And especially if somebody does it on their own, without professional help, like they're signing up with you, for example, it's really an uphill battle, and most people can maybe do it for a couple of weeks and they fall off the wagon. The idea is that something like KetoCitra can help out, the vast majority of people that might be struggling with nutritional ketosis and all these very strict diets, for the rest of their lives, which, that's really hard to do. You can sort of have a little shortcut there. But also, I think using KetoCitra in conjunction, even with a ketogenic diet, I think is very helpful.
Ketone, when you say it's exogenous, that just means that the body's not making it. So you've got BHB, the ketone, which you can get from KetoCitra that essentially the cyst cells cannot use for energy. So you don't have to follow a ketogenic therapy in order to use KetoCitra, yes. Mm-hmm. Someone can choose to take KetoCitra in order to get the BHB, which is beneficial. Or they could choose to do a ketogenic diet with the help of a health professional and then take KetoCitra, the BHB, in order to help do that easier.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Good. I got that. All right. So what about this other? So we got the keto part, and now what about the citra part? Tell me why the citrate is in KetoCitra and how it specifically helps with PKD.
Right. Yes. Good question. So it turns out that people with PKD have a few additional abnormalities, besides this whole metabolic thing where the cells are stuck on glucose. They also have a certain degree of acidosis, which just means that their body makes, for one reason or another, and it's not really exactly quite understood why, but the body makes too much acid. That acid has to be excreted through the kidneys, and that makes the urine acidic. Right, so the acidity is measured by the pH value. A pH of 7 is neutral. Anything less than 7, let's say like 5, is acidic. And it turns out that people with PKD have, on average, a very acidic urine pH. Urine pH also means that the kidney cannot excrete citrate very well. And on top of having the urine pH too low, they also have too low citrate levels in the urine. And what is citrate? So citrate is essentially citric acid. I think everybody knows citric acid. You actually buy it in the grocery store. You can use it to bake with and add it to all kinds of recipes and so on. Of course, citric acid is in lemons and in many other fruits and so on. So it's just a normal natural compound. But it turns out that citrate is very important for the kidneys to prevent these microcrystals from forming. And that's kind of the natural defense of the kidney. Because what citrate can do is it binds to calcium in the kind of the urinary tract, if you will, and inside the kidney. And that prevents the calcium from teaming up with another compound called oxalate, and which would then normally form calcium oxalate microcrystals, and they can be really bad, and they can go on to form big kidney stones. And in fact, the majority of the kidney stones in humans are made up of calcium oxalate. But if the kidney has plenty of citrate around, it can suppress the formation of these calcium oxalate crystals. If you take KetoCitra, it is actually formulated to normalize the urine pH, so it brings it away from the acidic range more into the neutral range again. It brings the citrate levels also back more to normal levels again. So you kind of have these two effects that then kind of like antagonize the formation of these microcrystals.
That sounds like something that's pretty powerful across a spectrum of problems with PKD. So what I'm hearing is that with PKD, a lot of people have very acidic urine, which is not good. I'm hearing that because of the balances in the body, that there's less citrate in their urine, which is not good. By having that KetoCitra and the citrate in it, it helps to raise the pH of the urine and also have more citrate in the urine, which are both really good things. Did I get that right?
Perfect. Yes, exactly right.
Yeah. It's interesting because citric acid sounds scary, but you mentioned a really good source of citric acid is lemon juice. We're talking about very natural components here put together in very specific amounts and ways for PKD, which I think a dietitian I think is really, really cool. What flavor is KetoCitra then? What does it taste like? It's a powder. And so
yes,
what does it taste like then?
We decided to make it lemon flavored because it just was a natural fit.
Shocking.
Yes. And I think it came out really well, the flavoring. We decided, of course, to make it only natural flavors. So there's actually real lemon extract and lemon powder in there. I think it tastes fantastic. In fact, if I compare it to lemonades, you buy in grocery stores and in 7-Elevens and so on, I think it beats a lot of them just by tasting more natural than a lot of the others that might be out there.
Listen up, all you folks that are good hydrators or taking tolvaptan or Genarq and drink a lot of fluid. This is a nice flavor combination to mix it up. I know I've tried KetoCitra and I agree with Dr. Weimbs. It's a nice flavor.
Yeah, I drink it myself every day. I have a jar right here. And, I think it just helps to be nice, to taste well. Otherwise, people might get tired of it pretty quickly. Can you mix it? It's a powder. Can you mix it? Does it have to be cold water? Can it be hot water? Can you mix it into something like yogurt? Are there restrictions on how you can use it? I would say anything goes. Cold water, warm water. I've heard from people that drink it like a tea, like a lemon type tea. You can put other flavors in addition to the lemon flavor that's already in there. Some people like matcha tea powder to throw that in there, which I tried. Tastes actually really good. Some people, I've heard of hibiscus tea. You put that in there. Tastes great. I've experimented with all kinds of other, tea bags of certain, like an orange tea bag, things like that. You could do
pretty versatile
sticks. Yeah, right.
Yeah, very versatile. Yeah. So that's really good to know. Now, there's a couple other things in there. So really quickly, I just want to highlight for listeners today what's in there so that they know that when they're having that conversation with their doctor, they know what and why. Specific to PKD, because that's really important. So you've got the BHB, you've got the citrate, and then you have calcium, magnesium, and a little bit of potassium. What's the benefit with those? In order to formulate it, there have to be these minerals in there, because otherwise it just doesn't work. Of course, we wanted KetoCitra to be sodium-free, and that's in contrast to most of the supplements out there, most of the BHB supplements that are oftentimes really, really high in sodium. There's lots of research that already says that sodium is just bad for polycystic kidney disease, worsens the disease, so strong associations there. We don't want sodium, so it's sodium-free. Instead of sodium, we kind of spread it out to calcium, magnesium, and potassium, which are actually all beneficial. Magnesium, for example, most people just in the general population are relatively magnesium deficient. I think as a dietitian, you know this pretty well. You're probably paying attention to all your patients, make sure they get their magnesium in there. So most people just don't get enough. The same is true of potassium. Most people don't get enough potassium, on a standard American diet, because it's very sodium heavy and relatively potassium poor. And potassium has a lot of benefits. There's a big misconception. Some people think potassium is bad for kidneys. That's actually not the case. Potassium is actually good for kidneys. The kidneys love potassium. The only problem with why potassium comes up with kidney disease is, at the end stage, when the kidneys start to fail and they cannot handle potassium properly anymore. That's when potassium can
kind of ramp up in the blood, and it can lead to a condition called hyperkalemia. So you don't want that, you want to avoid that. But most kidney patients actually benefit from having more potassium intake. It also helps with blood pressure typically.
Oh, huge benefits. In the PKD Nutrition Academy, I have a whole module that's called the perks of potassium. I think a lot of people see potassium and think it's hurtful for the kidneys, but it's the exact opposite. So if someone was to take a whole dose, a whole serving of KetoCitra in one day, how much potassium would that be adding for them?
Yeah, it's about the equivalent to the potassium that's in a large banana. So if anyone can handle an extra banana a day, they shouldn't have any problem with KetoCitra. So it's not a huge amount, yeah. So it's nothing to freak out about. And the other, the last part is the calcium, which is, again, most people in the general population also don't really get enough calcium in their diet. Calcium actually has the added benefit that calcium binds to oxalate. So where does oxalate come from? It comes from plant sources that we eat. Spinach is like a huge one, but almonds, for example, dark chocolate, Swiss chard, and there are many, many foods that are very rich in oxalate. And that can be a problem for the kidney because the oxalate, as I mentioned, can precipitate from these microcrystals in the kidneys, can kind of avoid all this by not even absorbing the oxalate with your food. So we recommend to take KetoCitra with a meal. So let's say you have a big salad you want to eat, there's a ton of spinach in there and this and that. It would have a gram of oxalate that you would get into your body normally. If you pair this with KetoCitra, calcium in the KetoCitra will help to bind all that oxalate and prevent it from being absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract. So you essentially just poop it back out again. Kind of a little bit of a safety mechanism built into KetoCitra right there to lower the uptake of oxalate for people.
So the calcium, which, folks, is not in a super high dose. So the calcium is helping to manage the oxalates, but also helping to meet calcium needs for bone health. Folks out there who are following ketogenic therapy is traditionally pretty low in calcium. Absolutely consider talking to your healthcare professionals and your dietitian to look at what you have coming in. And KetoCitra is a great safe amount source for calcium in that situation. That's my little plug there. And then the last thing in KetoCitra is something else, from my understanding, that helps with the urinary pH in the body's balance of acid and base. Tell me a little bit about what that last component is and how it benefits PKD.
Yeah, so that's the way the KetoCitra was formulated. Is it essentially delivers an alkaline base, and for the experts out there, it's about 50 milli equivalents of alkaline base. Never mind. If someone doesn't know what
that went over my head. I can't comprehend how much that is.
People with PKD, as we said, they have acidic urine, and this alkaline base load essentially helps to overcome this, or bring things back to normal. Yeah, so oftentimes people with kidney disease, they get the doctor might put them on sodium bicarbonate, for example, for the same reason, to alkalinize them more. It's something where one would look at what else one is taking. Like you as a dietitian, for example, you would usually review other supplements and medications a patient would take. If somebody is on bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, down. If you put somebody on KetoCitra, just so they don't kind of double up there necessarily. And I think it's actually a better solution, KetoCitra, because it's sodium free. You don't really, as a kidney patient, you don't really want to add more sodium in the form of sodium bicarbonate necessarily if you can avoid it. So,
yeah, sodium bicarbonate has, the first word sodium has a ton in it. Everything in KetoCitra is kidney friendly.
That's right. That was actually one of the biggest motivations to launch a company and try to make something available to people. Because lots of people were starting to ask me, hey, which supplement should I take? And my standard answer was always, whoa, I can't recommend any of them because they're usually not designed, with kidney safety in mind. They might have sodium in them, all kinds of fillers and additives and this and that, these supplement companies like to throw in there. It seemed to be sort of a need out there to actually come up with something that is, formulated to be kidney safe, and that I could, in good conscience, recommend.
I think that's so important. I've done a lot of digging into other products because I get asked about it a lot too. And the majority of supplements, because they are supplements, not medical food, on the market, they have up to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serving. So we're talking about people are doing 2 or 3 servings a day. Talk about not good for the kidneys, but plus all that other crap. That's what I call it. That's in there too. No, I agree. You always have to consider the kidneys when it comes to what you're taking. So if someone wants to talk to their doctor about KetoCitra, how would you recommend starting that conversation with a nephrologist or a doctor? Because I think a lot of people are a little bit intimidated by that. What would you say to them? How can they start that?
It's a good question. And fortunately, we hear this all the time that, a patient learns about KetoCitra and, even, about the ketogenic diets and so on. They're all excited. They go to the doctor and the doctor has, number one, probably never heard anything about it. And the instinct reaction is, whoa, this sounds like a supplement. No, don't take any supplements. So there's a bit of a need for education, and that's kind of on us also to try to start to educate healthcare practitioners more and have more materials out there. We do have some good materials on the Center of Our Nutrients website. There's I think a really good FAQ, frequently asked questions page that is actually written for doctors, for healthcare practitioners, that has lots of references there. All the papers are cited. So that would be a good link to send to the doctor to say, hey, I want you to take a look at this, check it out, tell me what you think. At least, all the papers are listed there. It's going to be a lot of work for a doctor to fight their way through all the details there. But I think if it's a good doctor, they should spend some time and learning about it.
Thomas, we need a one-pager to help people through that.
Yes, I know.
we need some help there because we don't want benefits of KetoCitra stopping with that conversation. Just going over with doctors, like, I'd like to go over this. And is there anything in here that would hurt me? Could it help me?
Right. Yes,
so
exactly.
We need to go back to SBN and tell them we need a one-pager that everyone can take to their doctors to help discuss this.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Because it is an opportunity. And with PKD, that's what we want now, is safe opportunities to impact the progressions. That is fantastic. Thank you for all that information. Is there anything that I missed or failed to ask you about that you would like to share with listeners today?
Yeah, just to say that, I think what I literally almost hear every single day is from patients is that, they were diagnosed a while ago by their doctor, and, the only thing they remember is that the doctor told them, oh, there's nothing you can do. You just come back once a year and we monitor your decline in kidney function. And when you're ready for dialysis, we start that and we put you on the transplant list. I think that has changed. That is not the proper advice anymore today. But unfortunately, most patients haven't really heard that yet, the change. And I think there's a lot now that patients can do based on the latest research to actually help themselves, make some changes in their diet, make some changes in their lifestyle, start something like KetoCitra, work with a dietitian who knows what they're doing, such as yourself. Important to work with someone who actually knows kidneys and knows ketogenic diets and has, a lot of knowledge there. Patients shouldn't take it as gospel what they might have heard 10 years ago in a doctor visit. That may not be, that's not the up-to-date knowledge anymore.
Our medical system tends to catch up with stuff probably about 10 years down the road. I agree there. And there are opportunities and there are options. And with PKD, that's what I find so exciting. Like, we are living in the time of all your research. we're living in the time of taking your research and making it a product that's available. I love that. This has been super fun to have you here. Such an honor. I know that you are a rock star in the PKD world and the community, but I'd love to, if you're game, end with what I like to call the Fast Five. It's kind of fun questions just to kind of get to know you. How do you feel about that?
Okay, sure. Let's try.
All right, you ready? And it doesn't have to be long answers, just the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay. Thomas, if you had to pick one food to eat every single day, what would it be?
Oh, geez. What I like is bread. I grew up with bread, my favorite food. But of course, if you have kidney disease, that's not what I would recommend. Probably for someone with kidney disease, butter.
No, for you, Thomas, if you had to pick one thing to eat every single day.
Then it would be bread if I could, but I'm actually on a ketogenic diet myself, just so I can experience it. So I can't eat bread right now.
You heard that, guys. Dr. Weimbs lives what he recommends. So
yes, I'm all right with everybody else.
No, you can actually do plant-focused ketogenic diets that have a lot of variety and options, even some sourdough breads. We'll talk later about that. Okay, number 2. A little birdie told me that you are in a jazz band. What's your band's name and what instrument do you play?
Well, it's not a professional band. We just meet once a week, in my garage. Actually, we have been slacking a little bit. I play the tenor saxophone. I play a little bit of keyboards, some guitar, some electric bass. And the band's name at last check-in was Groovish.
Groovish. Yes. I did not see that coming. You're playing all the instruments. Very fun. You ready for your third question? When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, geez. I was very much into nature. I wanted to be a forester, a hunter kind of person, when I was really little and I knew nothing. And eventually it grew into kind of like biology and research type of thing. So, yeah, I kind of grew up.
Okay, I can see that. I can see you as a hunter, but coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay. All right. There you go. Because I am a coffee girl too. Last question of our Fast Five is, what project or research around PKD is exciting you right now?
I think all these clinical trials we're working on right now to actually look at long-term outcomes, of people that take KetoCitra, that are going for the Renew program, that are implementing all these changes, We have already seen, and you have seen it because you have run the Renew program. You've seen the amazing beneficial changes after just 3 months of people going through the program. But I want to know, what about a year later? Are they still having these benefits? What has been their life been like? And that's a little bit more complicated. It needs a proper clinical trial, and we're working on those right now.
Definitely can't wait to see that too. And it's, it must be amazing to see your life's work go from lab to real life. I don't think that happens with a lot of research. So that's pretty cool. Thank you so much for being here today, Thomas. I know we learned a lot. Go ahead and tell the listeners where they can learn more about SBN, KetoCitra, and how to connect with you.
The best starting point is go to the Santa Barbara Nutrients website. So if you just Google Santa Barbara Nutrients, or even if you just Google KetoCitra, everybody should be able to get to it. Look around. There's a lot of informational material on there. Also, a Facebook group. If anyone is on Facebook, it's just called Weimbs Lab. If you just punch that into Facebook, should be able to get to the group. Anyone is welcome to join the group. There's a lot of discussion about PKD and diet, and a lot of research discussion that patients are actually very involved in. Feel free to join.
So we've got some science and some community. And by the way, guys, I'll drop all of those links into the show notes for you to connect, learn, grow, and also explore starting KetoCitra for yourself. Well, thanks again, Thomas. And hopefully we'll have you back on the podcast sooner than later.
Thank you, Diana. Anytime.